So the first question, does a plant-based diet supply all the necessary nutrients and minerals?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I think commonly asked. So I'm glad that that's asked. But yes, a plant-based diet is appropriate for all stages of life. It can supply all of the nutrients that our bodies need, with one exception of vitamin B12. So I know that you guys were interested in wondering which things to supplement with. And aside from other medical conditions or specific nutrient needs for people, the only supplement that everyone definitely needs to supplement with on a plant-based diet is vitamin B12. And it's interesting too, because that vitamin in particular isn't just for people who are 100% plant-based, but also for anybody over the age of 50 or on metformin, or who just happen to be low in vitamin B12. So it's always good to get that checked annually. And there's many different reasons why someone might need to take vitamin B12.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. And so also, I think a big concern is also kind of just iron and maybe calcium as well, especially for growing children. Is that kind of, I don't know, just kind of plant-based diet really? Because we think that meat and milk are really essential. But
yeah, that's a great follow-up question. So iron and calcium are definitely important. Studies have shown that the iron that's found in plant-based foods, although it's not the same type of iron in animal-based foods, it's just as good as supplying our iron needs. And the interesting thing about iron in plant-based foods is that our bodies selectively absorb how much we need of it. Whereas the iron in animal-based foods, we absorb all or most of it, regardless of if our bodies actually need it. So it's pretty cool to see that our bodies can decipher how much we need and don't take in extra, because it's actually not great to have extra iron in our body. So that's pretty neat. In terms of calcium, there are so many sources of calcium in a plant-based diet. You can find lots of different fortified non-dairy milks, calcium set tofu, beans and dark leafy greens naturally have it. And so as long as people are including those foods in their day-to-day eating, which most people would be, if they're eating a varied diet of lots of different plant-based foods, they're going to be getting enough calcium. So it's pretty rare for people who are following 100% plant-based diet to actually be low in calcium.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear that from someone like you, because I think that's definitely one of the misconceptions that people tend to have, along with the protein. Many people tend to question if a plant-based diet really has the potential to have as much protein as like a meat-based diet would. We're hoping that maybe you could touch up on that a little bit to clarify some of these misconceptions.
Yeah, that's actually probably the most popular question people ask about.
Yeah.
And it's super fascinating to think about it too. So most people don't need a lot of protein. What happens is most people are getting more protein than they need, which actually puts a lot of excess work on your kidneys and can put some strain on them. But the average person, an adult, actually anyone over the age of 14, usually needs between 46 to 56 grams of protein a day, roughly. Most people easily get over 80.
Wow.
So with like teenagers, for example, from 9 to 13, it's around 36 grams a day. And if you're younger than that, it's less than that. So it gradually kind of goes up as you get into adulthood. But it is very rare in industrialized countries to see a protein deficiency, regardless of if you eat plant-based or not. And it's pretty neat to see some of the biggest animals on our planet are totally plant-based. Think of like gorillas and elephants. They don't eat meat. They have plenty of protein and strong muscles. And then if you haven't watched Game Changers, that's another amazing documentary showing that plant-based protein is sufficient and can help some of the strongest athletes that are out there. So pretty exciting.
in addition to that, what would you say it looks like to get as many necessary nutrients as you need from plants as opposed to getting it from meat or animal-based products? Like, what is the kind of ratio that you need to eat in that day?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are four main food groups that I talk a lot about with my patients at Barnard Medical Center, and those are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes, which legumes, if you don't know, are things like beans, lentils, peas, tofu, stuff like that, which also happen to be the highest amount of protein per gram, that legume food group. But protein is actually found in all four of those food groups. It's just very small when it comes to fruit. So one other thing to kind of go back to your other question about protein is that as long as you're eating each of these four food groups multiple times a day, you're going to get enough protein and all the other nutrients that you need. Small amounts of nuts and seeds tend to be great as well. Of course, if somebody is struggling with blood sugar control, so type 2 diabetes, for example, or obesity or high cholesterol, it's good to look at how much fat intake, but that's a kind of a separate concept. So for the average person, it's still good to include small amounts of fat from nuts and seeds and avocados as well. So anyway, of those four food groups, one thing that's kind of interesting as somebody explores going plant-based is that they're kind of like, well, I tend to make my plate with I got my meat and my potato and my vegetable. And rarely do we see those kind of come together. But the beauty of plant-based eating is that if you combine these different food groups, you can have so many different variations and combinations. You don't have to keep your beans in this quarter of the plate and your greens in this quarter of the plate and your grains in this quarter. It's so fun to bring them together, to add sauces and spices and all sorts of flavorings to, explore really international cuisine.
That's so true. I feel like the interesting thing with plant-based diets and meals is that you can have the whole rainbow in there. So that's very cool. And all this saying, I'm assuming that you are a plant-based eater yourself. Could you maybe touch up on maybe things that you found hard becoming plant-based or that were a bit tricky for you?
Yeah, that's so I kind of went about it gradually. I was at college at the time and decided to go vegetarian because I was buying my own food and realized that meat's kind of expensive and beans are cheap. So that's where I started. And I have a friend of mine who was vegan and plant-based at the time kind of told me about plant-based nutrition as I was in school studying nutrition, which is super fascinating. And I would say some of the hardest parts for me was just getting over the hurdle of what I grew up hearing. I grew up hearing that I had to have, dairy 3 times a day, and that I needed lots of protein and that, these plant-based foods weren't sufficient, and that animal-based foods were better. And so just being able to kind of look at the science and understand what's true and what's marketing, and being able to interpret that helped me gain that knowledge that I needed to feel confident moving forward and eating plant-based foods exclusively. So it was a big knowledge gap for me. And I think once somebody understands that, once they get it, it's then just practical steps of, what do I do with my family, or what do I do at restaurants, or what am I going to eat for lunch, and it's reforming your patterns. But the cool thing is the more that you look around you, there's so many people, interested in plant-based meals, even if they haven't decided to go 100% plant-based. And there's so many restaurants offering options. And it's trending. And so you can read a lot about it online and watch a lot of documentaries. So there's opportunities to really immerse yourself and learn.
Yeah.
That's very true. And to follow up on that, I think many people as teenagers, they kind of are interested in plant-based diets, but we were wondering if you had any tips on maybe bringing up this topic with the family, because as teenagers, people are still living under their parents' roofs, and they're thinking about this transition, but like they can't really. Would you have any tips on maybe considering that while you're still living with your family?
Yeah, definitely. I love that question. So I think there's a few things to keep in mind. One is speaking for yourself rather than telling somebody else to change. So if you were to approach, others in your household and say, "Hey, I'm really interested in eating plant-based meals because I'm learning how this can help me prevent, chronic disease in the future," or "I'm trying to take care of our environment. It's really exciting. I'm learning a lot about this. What do you think about incorporating some plant-based foods or a plant-based day of the week in our family, in our household?" What can we do to essentially bring more plant-based foods into our home, even if it doesn't become exclusively plant-based? Also offering to help. If you're able to help with meal preparation or grocery shopping or finding recipes you think your family will like, or doing taste tests, anything where you can contribute rather than just saying, "Hey, so-and-so, I want plant-based foods, make this." And you have to eat it too. That doesn't really help win friends. So the more that you can be a contributor and be non-judgmental and inviting, if you even want to invite them to watch a documentary with you, if they're interested, cool. If they're not, that's okay too. It's living by example, I think, is a really big way to win friends. They're going to be excited to see what you're coming up with as well.
So before you mentioned how we're kind of brought up with the idea that we're supposed to eat meat. And I think I personally experienced the fact that kind of we're told that our ancestors always ate meat. We kind of are hunter-gatherers, and so we're biologically made to eat meat. Is that really the true story?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've seen that floating around so much. And there's some interesting speakers who have talked about this and what is really like that Paleolithic period. Not every single person ate meat then, even though it was available. But one thing that has stuck out to me in those lectures is that our teeth aren't really designed to be like carnivores. We can't bite into an animal that's raw and just break it down like the way that a lion would, for example. So it's interesting to think about that. Our own anatomy isn't really designed for that. We also can't eat raw, a pig, for example, that has to be cooked. So just kind of another indicator of maybe we weren't designed to do this. Not that that argument's not wonderful, because you can say the same thing about rice. You have to harvest it and cook it. You can't just eat it raw. But you can see that we don't have teeth that look like lions. And there were seasons where people didn't eat animal products at all, and they were fine. If it wasn't the season to be hunting and you were more gathering. So there is a way to sustain that. And I unfortunately don't have a great grasp of history, so I won't expand any further, but yes, you have to have meat in order to survive.
In sort of a topic shift, there are a ton of plant-based milk products floating around. There's so many options, and it might be a bit of an overwhelming choice at the beginning. So what plant-based milk do you think you would recommend, both for your own health and for the environmentally conscious side of it?
That's okay. Good, cool. So, man, you're right. There are so many out there. You see soy milk and almond milk, cashew milk. There's rice milk. There's so many ones. There's new ones every day, I think. There's milk made from peas. So in terms of health benefits, really any of them are good. And I think the more variety that we have in our diets, the better. So maybe this week you buy soy milk and next week you're going for almond milk. Or the following week you try the new almond coconut blend, But when it comes to choosing the healthiest options, looking for unsweetened milks, is going to be better, just so that you don't have those added sugars. It is, if you're not kind of used to that transition, I mean, I'll be honest, I went from drinking cow's milk, 2%, to like chocolate soy milk, because that was what I liked. And I went to very vanilla, and then original, and then unsweetened. So your taste buds do take some time to adapt. And so if you're, if you try to transition so quickly and don't like it, well, think about maybe a more gradual way to do that and having an end goal in mind. But the switch up is best, just because the nutrients found in soy milk might vary a little bit from what's found in rice milk. And so if you can introduce that variety, you're going to be healthier overall. And that doesn't just apply to milk. So it really applies to all 4 of those food groups that I mentioned: fruits and vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. Like, the more you can switch up your choices within each one every day, the better and healthier you're going to be. And then in terms of the environment, trying to go for nitrogen fixing plants. So, peas, for example, are a nitrogen fixing crop. I'm not sure about the other ones in particular, but I would say almonds are probably not the most environmentally friendly, if I were to take a guess. So maybe doing your research a little bit more on which one is best for the environment. The interesting thing about almond milk, though, is that it's not that many almonds. It's a lot of water. So anyway, I won't touch on stuff that I'm not necessarily that trained in when it comes to the environment, but that's my basic understanding.
Thanks. There was another question here from somebody who was wondering, does a plant-based diet affect metabolism? Is there a link with that? Yeah.
It does. We've actually done some studies at the Physicians Committee on metabolism specifically, and showing that for people who have any kind of metabolic dysfunction, so diabetes, obesity, for example, they boost their metabolism, improve and make it more efficient by following a low-fat plant-based diet. And part of that is because plants contain a lot of different vitamins and minerals that sustain our metabolism, that literally are our fuel. The other part of it is when somebody has type 2 diabetes, their metabolism tends to plummet. And part of that's because of the fat within their cells. It doesn't mean that you're overweight necessarily, but fat can build up within our cells from eating too much fat over time. And a lot of that comes from animal-based foods like cheese and meat, or even just a lot of oil. So fried foods and processed foods, and that can build up and cause insulin resistance, which then is going to plummet our metabolism as well. But in our clinical research studies, we've shown that when people transition to low-fat plant-based, and most plant-based foods are pretty low in fat, their metabolism gets better. So it's pretty cool to see those changes.
Another question, specifically about the vegan lifestyle. Would you say that eating plant-based is more expensive for the average person?
I would say it doesn't have to be. So if you look at things like beans and rice and corn and potatoes and carrots and bananas, they're kind of some of the cheapest options in the grocery store, aside from heavily processed foods like pretzels. Even those are plant-based. I think where people get into, especially if you compare like beans and lentils to steak or even chicken or fish, you see the price difference. Like it's definitely cheaper in terms of, the program cost to be getting those legumes in instead of animal-based proteins. So that's, I think, where you have the biggest cost savings. I would also say that it's easy to spend a lot of money on a plant-based diet if you're going for a lot of like processed swaps. So if you try and spend like your money on expensive plant-based cheeses, like there are some very gourmet plant-based cheeses out there made from cashews, for example. They're delicious, but they cost a lot of money. So there's the trade-off of, if you decide to choose foods like that, that can up your budget. But you don't have to do that. You can still, there's so many easy ways to eat plant-based on a budget. And there's actually a cool blog, I think it's called plantbasedonabudget.com. I could be slightly off on that, but if you Google it, it's a blog all about eating plant-based on a budget. So there's lots of resources for that.
Great. I also had one final question. A lot of people are kind of not going plant-based overnight. They're trying to make kind of a gradual switch, like you. And what is the kind of most significant, or what are the most significant kind of small steps that one could take to improve their health and reduce the impact of a meat-heavy diet?
Yeah. So how do you go about it gradually? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Yeah. And what are the most significant kind of changes that you can make to improve your health?
Yeah. So I would say, there's interesting studies showing that the less animal products that you have in your diet, the lower risk you have for obesity, type 2 diabetes, for example. We've seen this in Seventh-day Adventist studies. And so if you look at this research, you'll see that people who include meat and fish and dairy have some of the highest risk for developing those diseases. And then if you go to pescatarians, then they have the next lowest risk. And then below that is lacto-ovo-vegetarians, which means they include milk and eggs, but not fish or meat or chicken. And then vegans have the lowest risk for developing type 2 diabetes and obesity. So if you're kind of able to maybe follow that increment of, starting with getting rid of meat and poultry, or maybe if that sounds like too much at one time, you start with just red meat and work your way down. Or maybe it looks like trying to reduce your portion size. So if you're, used to having a full chicken breast, what does it look like to have a half of one? And then the next week, try it without it. And so I think just always challenging yourself to continue to reduce that while replacing it with more of those 4 food groups. So if you just take like a salad and get the chicken off of it, or spaghetti marinara and remove the beef, you're probably into it to replace what was there. For example, instead of doing like a beef crumbles on a marinara, spaghetti marinara, try putting in lentils, like brown lentils or white beans. And that's going to help you feel full, because foods that are high in fiber really help you feel full, which is only found in plant-based foods. Or instead of, same thing, if you're having a salad with grilled chicken on top, take that chicken off and try putting roasted chickpeas on top. Those are delicious and crunchy and kind of are like croutons. So any way that you can, remove or reduce animal products and replace them with those plant-based food groups is really helpful. One of the things that I wanted to mention earlier too is that a lot of times people will go, like, they're thinking, oh, I'm going to go eat more vegetables, I'll just eat more salad. But actually know how to build a salad that's like exciting and filling. Like to us, like a salad is like romaine lettuce with tomatoes and cucumbers and Italian dressing. Like that's not very filling. So what does it look like to add in things like cooked quinoa or corn, which is some other different food groups, lots of roasted vegetables or fresh herbs like basil, and just make it way more exciting. Or maybe we're thinking, let's not go to salads. Let's think about other options like these greens and grains bowls with falafel on top and, pickled vegetables. Like let's have fun with our food and bring in lots of color. So whenever you're able to involve 3 or 4 of those food groups at the same time in the same meal, it's going to make it more satisfying and give your body the nutrients that you need.
Wow. And just one question that popped in my head. I was speaking with somebody today, and the topic of like efficiency came up, and somebody said that that in terms of efficiency, a meat-based diet was more efficient than I guess a vegetable-based diet. I was wondering maybe you could expand on that, or how did.
And when you mean efficiency, what exactly do you mean by that?
In terms of, I think, nutrient uptake, how filling it is and everything, in terms of people are claiming that maybe a meat-based diet is a lot more filling and than a vegetable-based diet very well. But Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I think where the kind of frame of mind and shifting that would be is instead of thinking of like meat and protein as like your fuel and that efficient way of eating, thinking more along the lines of like volumetrics and fiber. And I know that's a very like nutrition-ish term. It's not really that helpful. But with plant-based meals, what you see is you see a lot of food. Like there's a pretty big bowl of these different food groups. What's unique about them is that they have fiber, and fiber is very, very filling. It helps you feel satisfied. It helps keep you healthy. And so the shift goes from this like, protein focus with lots of like fat and meat to this like abundance of plant-based foods that are high in fiber, that are going to be more effective in preventing and reversing diseases, diet-related diseases, and oftentimes better nutrient sources for our bodies. So I'm not sure if that totally answered your question, but yeah.
No, it did. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Not from us, but we did want to open it up to the people that are here and ask if there was anyone who wanted a question. If there's no other questions, then I think that will be it. So just opening it to the floor.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So I really want to transition into plant-based foods, and my parents are becoming more supportive of it, and they are incorporating it in our household. But the problem with it is that I also want to become like a fully vegetarian or like vegan person. But the thing they're really concerned about is not really the nutrients now, but then about like medications and like certain products that actually have animal products in them.
So are they kind of trying to figure out like, well, how do you go 100% plant-based when there may be some foods that have animal products in them that you weren't aware of, or medications that definitely takes a little bit of a deep dive in seeing, what foods do you commonly buy and what's in the ingredient list. There's a really helpful thing on the back of labels that says contains certain allergies. And so it's helpful to see because milk is a common allergy, eggs, and that can help you kind of quickly identify if there might be some animal-based foods in there. Then thoroughly reading that ingredient list is good. Certain medications may be made by testing on animals. That can definitely be tricky, but talking with your doctor about that and letting them know that of your interest can be good. But yeah, it definitely takes some time to really see, what am I having that still has animal products, and what can I swap out for that? And I'm glad that your family is so supportive. That's very exciting.
Yes. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Of course.
Any other questions?
Well, if that's it, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it, and this was very educational. I personally learned a lot, and I think everyone else watching will.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much for joining. Really, really.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you all coming together and listening. And if you have any other questions, let me know. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Well, see y'all later.
Have a nice day.
Take care. Bye.
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 What is
Oh
wrong?
no. Also, sorry I cut you off.